Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being with us for our January meeting. As I just was saying and talking to our speakers, we've got lots of things happening and lots of things that really reinforce the importance of the work that we're doing here. So I really am grateful to all of you for being here. And, just a couple of examples. We just obviously this week commemorated Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and really reminded of Dr. King's vision of hope. And I hope that we are all sharing that kind of vision now. And the really unwavering commitment that he had to justice, even when things were difficult and hard and facing adversity. And I sort of have the feeling we might be needing to do some of those things in the next years ahead. And then we're going to be talking also today a little bit about climate. And we've all been seeing the whole wildfire piece in Southern California. I was actually talking to someone there yesterday who said, even though they seem to be making some progress against the fires, the general air quality is just so terrible. And the really awful health impact it's having on people. So even though they've made progress, they still are really in need of our thoughts and our concerns about what's happening out there. And I do want to remind people, if you will help us to spread the word, and we're going to be putting something in the chat about it. I always say, tragedy brings out the bad guys, because people are kind and generous and they want to give and be helpful to the victims of the fire and other things. And it is literally the moment that starts, the scammers start. So we're just really promoting that message of, if you want to be helpful, please just be sure you're giving to verified organizations. Maximize the money that you're able to give. We're putting in the chat right now a few links that we know are good. And we mentioned a little bit things that, for instance, if you're interested in helping with the animals, or you're helping with children, or helping with clothing, it gives you a good sense of what those are. Just a couple of announcements for us. We are, excuse me. We have in the chat as well our meeting dates for this year going forward. We've changed the schedule up a little bit, not the day or time, but just how frequently we're coming together as we're sort of reconstituting our board. So this will hopefully give people an opportunity to put those dates in now, because we look forward to having you with us. And then again, looking at, and I know people have been seeing the research that's been coming out, whether it's been from the Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE, or the ADL, we are continuing to see those numbers of hate and bias incidents climbing. Anti-Muslim crimes have increased by 49% compared from 24 to 23. Anti-Jewish hate crimes have gone up by 32%. And in the 3 months following the October 7th attacks, those incidents went up by 361%, which is just a staggering number. And that 361 really resulted in 3,291 new incidents being reported. And you may have seen the Globe today. The colleges and universities here in Middlesex, most prominently Harvard and MIT, have settled lawsuits against them, alleging that they did not act appropriately to students on any side during that period. The good news is the case is resolved. The bad news is the definitions they're using and things, I think, are going to be problematic. So I don't think that's the end of what we're going to see there. We're also hoping, again, that people are getting out that information about the forms that we have online about reporting. I've been meeting since the holidays with a number of community groups, and people saying, and this is totally understandable, I have either been victimized and I don't want to publicly come forward, but I do want to report, or something happened to me. I understand it may not be a crime, but it is a hateful incident. And that form is a good way to do either. It helps us, excuse me, we'll get rid of that frog. It helps us to know what's happening in the community, even if it isn't a crime. And if people want to tell us something did happen and not give us their name, they certainly can do that as well. So, what one of the most important things is, and I say this all the time, is that yes, we can put the link to the chat, the link to the form in the chat, is when we go out into a community, and we strive all the time here to be thinking about that question of how do we reduce the number of people who might ever wonder if they belong here. That, I think, is one of my primary charges. And it isn't just about people being safe, because overall in Middlesex, we are a very safe county. It is also about people feeling safe. And so many times when we have something that happens, we go out to the community. We're there to talk about this incident. And as I've been seeing in these groups in the last few weeks, there's a whole treasure trove of things that people never reported, never told anything, but they are going through the community in chats with people. People don't feel safe because those incidents are out there, and we are not addressing that. And yes, Kim, we can also put the stats in there too, that I was just talking about from those cases. So reporting and letting us know things, number one, helps us to know what people are hearing. Sometimes in the good situation, things people are hearing may not be accurate, and we can correct that. And it also helps us to allocate resources. As you all know, in doing this work, I would be a rich woman if I had a nickel for everyone who has told me they don't have this problem in their town. And yet we know that it's happening in all 54 of our cities and towns, and it's happening with more frequency in some places. And that's where we'd like to prioritize sending our resources. So this helps us to do all of that. And, clearly, and most importantly this week, we know that President Trump has begun a second term. And regardless of what your politics are, we cannot be surprised that there is a push on immigration right now. I mean, one thing that has to be said is that President Trump was not unclear that that was going to be where he was going. So the fact that it's day 4 and that's where we're going was pretty foreseeable. And we don't know yet exactly what's going to happen, clearly, but his proposal to eliminate the temporary protected status, restrict people applying for asylum, impose different rules about visas, and then particularly not just changing the rules about visas, but targeting certain countries, which is what we expect is going to happen. And last month, you'll recall, for the folks who were here, we heard from Community Action Center in Somerville about the outreach and support they're giving to the immigrant community, which is really critical. And we want to encourage those efforts. We also, and we've been working in this office for a while now, kind of getting ready, because it is not just that things are going to be different out in the field and that we can expect to see different pieces. You'll recall 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we sued and we became the first place in the country as a result of that lawsuit that this office and the Suffolk DA's office, as well as some of our other partners, filed to have protection here that people could go to the courthouses. We obviously did not think we would need to be getting protection for churches and schools, but that clearly is where we are now. The other piece, and I think for any of you doing this work or supervising people who are doing this work, a new directive came out yesterday, a 3-page directive about the potential penalties anybody can face for interfering or obstructing enforcement of that. And I don't think that's an idle threat. And I think that just realistically, if you wanted to make a point, Massachusetts would be a place where you would start by making a point. And regardless of what your politics are, not giving truthful information to a federal officer is a crime. And there are many other things that, regardless of where you are or why you do what you do, it's a crime. And, I certainly know that for our assistants in court, we want them to be prosecuting their cases, moving cases along, protecting people who come to us for help. But we don't want anybody falling into that breach where they're now the target of prosecution themselves. And I think, for instance, in hospitals and churches and places where I know many of you are working or volunteering, that's going to be a real issue. There's going to be a statement made. That seems fairly clear. So we're very fortunate today to have with us to talk really about a number of those issues and what we're thinking about in terms of where we think, to the extent that any of us can predict and prediction is a game because nobody really knows where that's all going. But to have Attorney Winnie Okoye, I hope I pronounced that correctly, to talk to us about where we are going to be going with that, what we think some of the rules are. I'm sure you've been thinking, as we have, about what the overview is, where you think we're going to be taking that. And remembering that we have cities and towns that are sanctuary cities. Those cities have really been stepping up and trying to pass other legislation, particularly Boston and Chelsea, to emphasize that commitment. I've been pleased that the Massachusetts Chiefs of Police Association has issued those advisories, reminding people that by law in Massachusetts, if ICE has a civil detainer, and that's all being here illegally leads to, is a civil detainer, that the police departments do not have authority to detain people on those detainers. We hope that is reassuring people in the immigrant community. I'm not ever sure how much that's doing that. Even when we got the injunction, and some people have heard me say this before, when we got the injunction several years ago, I was obviously pleased that we had done it, but really so saddened. We did a community meeting one day at a hospital, and a number of people had come with a laminated copy of that injunction, which they intended to show anybody who might stop them. So I'm not sure how far we went in reassuring people if they felt the need to do that. We're also going to be doing a lot of Know Your Rights programs and doing that in collaboration with lots of our partners. And that's going to be an ongoing conversation. So I am really happy to have you here with us this morning to, again, as I said earlier, certainly you will not be going out of business anytime soon in terms of where we are. So I turn it over to you and thank you so much.
Oh, dear Ryan, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, listen, I don't know is where I want to start up this conversation with. I'm going to share my screen so we can plow into this together. Let me know if everyone is able to see my screen well.
Yep, you can see it.
Awesome. So the truth, and I'm going to be really honest, the truth is that in the 20 plus years that I've been an immigration attorney, I have never really been this uncertain, and I have never really been this unsure, and I have never really been this scared. But the reality is, like dear Ryan said to us, reminded us, there are times that our convictions and our courage and our values will be tested, right? And this looks like the times, that we're going to do that. So let me be clear. The immigration law is federal law. A lot of people get confused about that. Immigration enforcement agencies are supposed to be federal agencies. So there's a lot of federal agencies, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the Department of Homeland Security, HSIs, Custom and Border Patrol agencies. Those are federal agencies because immigration law is predominantly federal law. However, I want to be clear, and that is the sad part of all of this, is that it is state and local enforcement agencies that somehow facilitate immigration detention and enforcement operations. And why is that, someone may ask? It is because there are things like the Secure Communities Program, which essentially was created, and the U.S. and Customs Enforcement is ultimately notified if anyone is taken into custody. And how does this happen? You know, when you're arrested and fingerprinted, you know, ultimately information is made all the way up, you know, it goes to them, they're notified, no matter how trivial, you know, the circumstance of your arrest is, or what the crime, the misdemeanor, it doesn't even matter. So ultimately, ICE is notified. So the state and the local municipalities wield a lot of power and authority. And in the last decade, 70 to 75% of people who make their way to immigration custody are from local enforcement. So essentially, it will be a battle for and a challenge for all of us. In addition to the 8 sanctuary cities we already have in the Commonwealth, how can we make policies? How can we enact legislations that would ensure that these enforcement operations are not being carried out by our police and local departments where we don't have resources to address issues of detention and deportation. Every community, I don't know of any community that has that much of a resource to divert to federal enforcement. So it's going to be the challenge in these times. So what has happened in the last 48 hours?
So can I just, sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but can you start your PowerPoint from the beginning so we see the complete slides?
Can you see it?
Yes, but you just have to start it, like we see the notes and everything, and so you just have to go to the top and
Okay.
do
Oh, I
start
see
from-
what you mean. I see what you mean. Now, there. Is it okay now?
I think you want to put it in slideshow mode.
Okay.
Right.
So
Let
if
me-
you look at the very bottom of your screen, I just saw it on the very bottom of your screen. I don't see it anymore. There's a way, it's your bottom right. There's a way you can actually hit the slideshow mode so we don't see your notes.
Okay, let's see. Where is
Should be
my
at the bottom right for you. I can't see it anymore, but it looks like a little box.
little box?
It might be on the top. On mine, it's on the top.
It might be, or on the top left of your screen.
Top left.
If you click slideshow at the top there, there should an option should pop up to play from beginning, and that will make it a full screen. So
Let me see.
It's the 8th icon from the word file at the top.
Top left.
I see the file at the top, but I can see.
oh no, so
You
slide
hit
over
slide,
to
keep going over with the
slideshow.
cursor. Keep moving to the right, keep moving to the right up top. Nope, you weren't high enough.
Do you see the word
file?
show
Nope.
to the right?
You see file, then you see home.
I
you
see
insert.
file
Nope,
and I see home.
nope, go back. Hit the
Go
arrow
back.
back. Right now, you see the word file. Don't click it. File, then home. Keep going to the right, then insert, draw, transition. Keep going.
3 more.
Animations, now slideshow. Do you see the word slideshow? You're too high now. Go back to where you were. I see the word
Go
design.
down.
Do you see design?
I see design.
Keep going. Transitions,
Transitions.
animations.
Okay, hold on.
You see animation? The next one is slideshow. I see it at the bottom of your screen too. There's something at the very bottom right of your screen that would make this right there. Nope. Don't click anything. Keep moving to your left.
To my
Keep
left,
moving. There's a right. Nope, to your right now.
to my right.
Right there. Right there. Click it.
Slideshow.
Yes. Bad
Okay,
tweet.
great. Okay.
There you go.
Guys, I'm technologically challenged. If my
As am
associate
I.
is not in the office, it's usually like that. Thank you so much. Okay, can everyone see it now?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. Teamwork. Yes. So, so this is where we're at. So in less than 24 hours, as everyone knows, this administration has unleashed a slew of executive orders to execute their mass deportation and detention regime. There's so many of them. I don't even think that I want to go through all of it, but you know, the most litigated one right now, there are about 23 states, the last I checked, that are in federal court. Massachusetts, hey, we're doing it. But the protecting the meaning and value of American citizenship is the one that is highly litigated because essentially it's a challenge to the 14th Amendment. It's an executive order that purports to end birthright citizenship for infants who are born on or after February 19, 2025, and who do not have at least one parent in possession of lawful permanent resident card, which is essentially the green card, or the other parent or one parent being a U.S. citizen at that infant's birth. So this executive order impacts only infants born at least 30 days from January 20 of 2025. It does not apply, as most laws do, it doesn't apply retroactively. So essentially, one of the other orders is the realigning the United States Refugee Admissions Program. For people who do not know, for you to become qualified to come to the United States as a refugee, the process is long and the process is arduous. And so essentially this order purports to end that within 1 week, which is people who's waited, and I'm not even joking, some people have waited 15 years that I know of. They applied, their countries are at war, they have natural disasters, they are doing it the right way. So this is not a question of, ooh, you're sneaking across the border. These people followed the law. Well, come January 2025, it might not, January 27, 2025, it's done. And then there's the securing our borders, it sets various border enforcement policies. There's the declaring a national emergency at the southern border of the United States. The executive order essentially details the use of armed forces, physical barriers, and unnamed aerial systems at the southern border to address the newly declared national emergency. So, there is the mass immigration. Essentially, there's an order calling for the military to submit a 10-day plan in 10 days. So the military authorized in 10 days to submit a plan that will tell this administration how to go about sealing the borders. It's unclear how the military will respond, given, resources are not made available to you and you're told to do this within 10 days. There's the executive order about reinforcing registration requirements. So this is actually a law that has hardly been used, essentially requiring people who are undocumented to register and prioritize. It helps essentially immigration, customs enforcement, USCIS to know that they are in the country and that they are here illegally, right? It's always existed, but it's rarely enforced. Why? Most times the capacity constraints. So immigration attorneys all over the country were struggling with, should we advise our clients to register? If they don't register, it's malpractice. So, it's really very challenging on certain times, right? There's the expansion of the expedited removal procedure from the border communities to the whole country. So in the past administration, last week, essentially, if you're unlawful here and you've been here for less than 2 years, you can be deportable without due process, expedited removal. Essentially, if a CBP officer or an ICE officer encounters you within 100 miles from the border, they can deport you summarily if you've not been in the country for up to 2 years. Well, now this has been expanded everywhere within the country, meaning, members of a community can be stopped. And, if they make the mistake of not invoking their Fifth Amendment right and not respond, if the officer has enough information to surmise that they are here less than 2 years, they can summarily remove them. So there's the requirement of the imposed mandatory detention and other executive order of individuals in deportation proceedings. So essentially, let me explain this. You can't ordinarily be removed from the United States. You go through the removal proceedings, which, of course, I don't know if a lot of us know, courts are so backlogged now with the expansion of expedited removal and the imposition of the mandatory detention in facilities. These are private jails, and most of these jails are private, and a lot of these people make tons of millions and billions of money. Well, they're back in business, because it's given ICE officers the right to detain these individuals without detain them without having them be eligible for bond, during the removal proceedings. And there is also the, there's a lot of them. I don't even know. Let me go back. There is the executive order that essentially terminates the categorical parole, TPS status for people from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela. And temporary protected status is a status given to people who are here and whose country are going through, all sorts of things. So no, this administration is telling us that it will no longer be extended, the temporary permission, but they said it's still available on a case-by-case basis. DA Ryan talked about the suspension of the refugee program. I spoke about that before, imposing additional vetting requirements for visa applicants. I am here to tell you that the additional vetting requirements are going to target people from Muslim country, Black people, people who for some reason, disclose, or LGBTQ. Those are because then it's given so much discretionary powers to people adjudicating these visa applications. So there's also the executive order about reinstituting the Remain in Mexico program that, and if you've ever used public benefit, you're not qualified and all of that. So like I said before, we have states responding to the Trump's executive order relative to birthright citizenship. There are more than 23 states and counting. The lawsuits in the federal court here in Massachusetts. It's an affront to the 14th Amendment. We'll see how it goes. And so now what do we do in a situation like that? How are we as community activists, leaders, what are we supposed to do to help immigrants within our community? So I said it before, the foot soldiers are our local law enforcement. Even though immigration is supposed to be the enforcement, there's nothing under the law. There's no, how do I put it? So there's no federal legal obligation for states or local jurisdictions to use their resources to help with immigration enforcement. However, we have sheriffs and police departments have historically helped. And so it looks like, they just continue helping. But people will typically ask, are they mandated? Well, there are states like Oregon and Illinois. These are the states that when I look at the model states that have enacted strong and comprehensive state law restricting the transfer of anyone to ICE, they are the models to look at. I printed out the Oregon sanctuary law this morning just to look at it, and it read like a prayer. They enacted strong, it read like a prayer, literally. Just affirmation to immigration or immigrants within the community that they are protected, that they are safe. Nothing is going to happen to them because they declined any of those interactions or any of those detention or orders from ICE to detain. They are just, I was reading it this morning. I was blown away. So Oregon and Illinois are models for us to go take a look at what they did and try or attempt to do the same in our communities. We can also enact policies in our towns and cities that limit involvement in ICE enforcement. Right now, as most of us know, it's only Boston, Somerville, Northampton, Amherst, Cambridge, Concord, Lawrence, and Newton that are the state's sanctuary cities in Massachusetts. Now, there are some states who have enacted somewhat of a protection, not a lot. California, New Jersey, and Washington, Colorado, Connecticut, Maryland, and Vermont have enacted some sort of protection against ICE involvement. Colorado, Connecticut, Maryland, and Vermont enacted some protection. New York and Rhode Island had kind of taken some small steps when I looked at what they did. Alabama and Tennessee are absolutely anti-sanctuary. And there are states like Texas that had taken it a step further by criminalizing being in the state illegally. So they have legislated that into their state statute, so that's part of the reason that you can be arrested. So You go from the extremes to the people who, we should be modeling. So now there's something that I highlighted in red that the mayor spoke already about. As of yesterday, the memo sent to the employee of the Justice Department ordered federal prosecutors to investigate and crack down on state or local officials who resist or who fail to comply with the arrest and deportation of immigrants in their communities. So, chilling. Someone was saying to me yesterday, in one of the calls, does it then mean that we can't cooperate and we can't, it is difficult to answer that. There are people who believe that that particular memo can be challenged and the outside limits of its legality be tested, right? So we'll wait and see. But bottom line, like I say to people, my clients, we can't lie to federal authorities. We already know that. The best case scenario is asserting our rights. Our constitutional rights still remain, despite what's going on. Well, I don't even know. He challenged the 14th Amendment, so I don't know. But yeah, our constitutional right, our Fifth Amendment right, not to incriminate ourselves, to remain silent. You don't have to speak to federal authorities when they come to you. So I talk about this particular slide, taking into consideration the memo from yesterday. So something to flag for all of us. So how can we support our immigrants? Public safety concerns. I cannot begin to tell you this last, as you all know, all of us, I think, all of us, the last couple of weeks, it's crazy what's going on. Just our neighbors, being in the practice of immigration law for as long as I've been, the clients, just the hopelessness and the fact that they are scared. I have maybe 5 texts in my phone right now saying, Attorney Okoye, I'm scared. What should I do? I don't have answers but to reiterate what I've been given to them, which is the red card, what your rights are, what you should do to protect yourself. As communities, we have to reiterate our support for immigrants in our community, LGBTQ people in our community, humanitarian support, legal support. I am here in Lynn. We're doing a lot of clinics in Lynn. Know Your Rights clinics. What else can we do in communities? There's the risk of the data privacy threat. Immigrants are afraid because their data are usually shared at a larger level with other organizations. So every community should flag what they do in terms of privacy threat to immigrants, to become more strict in terms of who are they sharing the data with. Agencies like ICE, have access to vast amounts of personal information, biometric information for those clients and our community members. And you know what? I think about this all the time. I started off my legal career as a bar advocate 20 years ago. And I just say this all the time. What's going on right now, it's like giving people all the permission in the world to racially profile and surveil people who don't look like you. It's really sad because people who make their way into deportation situation are typically people who started off at the state level because either they committed a crime and like I say during my presentations, my sons, I have 2 sons, and I say to them all the time, you're not going to get away the way your friend Jack is going to get away if they're arrested. So you better be careful. So racial profiling and surveilling is almost like it's legal essentially, and it's not acceptable, but that's where we are right now. So limit data sharing in communities, enhance data security measures, ensure privacy in social services and legal aid. So anything to protect the data of our clients. Like I said, state and local governments can refuse. There's nothing that legally mandates them. However, I say that prefacing what just happened yesterday, the fact that people are essentially being told they're going to be arrested. So what would our communities look like if we begin to employ this, we help members of the community avoid unlawful detention. We prevent family separation. There's a story, actually a story that's so indelible in my mind. It happened to me in the last Trump 1.0. It was a client who owned a local business here in Lynn who was going to be deported. Our office succeeded in dismissing the criminal charges. And then I got a call from the jail that they just contacted ICE. And I begged the officer, I said, please, 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 I beg you. I say, this man's been here 20 years. Don't, he's like, if you get here first, I'll release him to you. If the ICE gets here first, I'll release it to them. Okay. Literally, that's what it was. It took me. It was pouring. I jumped in my car. It was pouring. I'm running over, driving. I could barely see, but I'm like, Jesus, if this is the last favor that I'm going to get, this man cannot be taken into ICE custody because that's it. Luckily for me, I got a call while I was driving frantically. The officer said, okay, just come get your client. That was how that client escaped deportation. So fostering trust between immigrant communities and the local enforcement. I cannot stress local law enforcement. I cannot stress how important that is. It keeps all of us safe. So this is the Know Your Rights, everyone. I'm sure everyone on this call, gauging by the nature of work, we all do. We know this because we've been attending a lot of this in the last couple of days. Tell your community members, tell everyone they have a right. Don't open the door. Legally, you don't have to open the door. Their warrant has to be signed by a judge. Ask officer to identify themselves. Sometimes I say, don't even ask any, just say, I am choosing to remain silent, and slide this card that I've been sharing with everyone that I know Your Rights card. And something else, if immigration comes to your work site and you're an employer, typically it's either the Department of Labor or the Homeland Security Investigation, HSI. Please do not have any interactions with them besides saying, I want to let you know that I'm contacting my attorney. Every business should have a speed dial for their attorney, immigration attorney that's experienced in this area. HSI can come and conduct an enforcement action against your work site and find out that they do have a valid search warrant. Not just any search warrant identifies that it's your facility. It has a time period for the search. They cannot go into areas of your facility that is private unless you consent and unless the search warrant depicts precisely that area. They may demand that your equipment be shut down when they come, and they may move your employees into a contained area. They may ask that no one leaves. They are investigating. Sometimes they come based on a lead and all of that. They may question your employees, have a conversation with your employees as a matter of necessity. Tell your employees about their rights to remain silent. They don't have to answer any questions, but do not tell them not to cooperate. Like if they ask questions, they tell them they have a right to remain silent. Employees do not have to show their identity documents that discloses their country of nationality and citizenship. So I'm going to just stop there. Thank you so much. Okay. No, I think I have a couple more slides. Wait. If you are stopped in a car, you have a lower expectation of privacy. Stay in your car, place your hand on your steering wheel so that the officer can see that. I'm going to reiterate, you do not have to answer any questions. Present your Know Your Rights card, carry with you. We've given out more than 300 in the last couple of weeks. Do not lie. Do not give any false document. Invoke your right to remain silent. Very important. If you're stopped in public, lowest expectation of privacy, lowest Fourth Amendment issue. Yes, we do have the card in Spanish and in Portuguese. Yes, we do. Stay calm. Do not resist arrest. If it's in public, do not run. Always ask, am I free to leave? If they say you are, then walk away quietly. Don't answer any questions you're not mandated to. Give them the card. I don't want to answer anything. So the card can be obtained on www.redcardsorders.com. And I will put it in the chat later on. So that's where our organization, Immigration Welcome Center, Service Center, got the cards from. Yes. Angela, yes. Thank you for sharing the link. Yes. So in conclusion, states and local government can and do play a critical role in helping to protect their immigrants residents, their immigration status notwithstanding. When local and state law enforcement are not involved in immigration detention and deportation, immigrant communities feel a lot more safer, a lot more integrated, a lot more secure. They feel the need to get more involved in their communities. Why would I come out to help out in my community knowing that I'm exposing myself? So there's an escalation of anxiety and mental health issues. I don't know how prevalent it is in your communities, but because I see firsthand what my clients go through, almost all of the children being diagnosed with this. I mean, it's because of what is going on. So ultimately, it's in all of our collective best interest that our communities, activists like us, make it easier through policies and advocacies and know your right presentation. And we have one coming up here in Lane in the next couple of days, I think it is, in church, in a big church. Those make the immigrants have a semblance of, and while it's difficult, it makes them have a semblance of calm despite what's going on. And I would just close by saying that I want to encourage everyone on this call. And while I'm encouraging you, I'm encouraging myself too. These times demand moral courage. These times demand, because the test of our convictions and all of that, this is the time, this is the moment. And the clients that texted me this morning and said, they're so scared, I don't even have anything to say but say that we will get through this. Like I say to my children all the time, this too shall pass, but it wouldn't pass without our advocacy, our conviction, our action steps. So I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was helpful. Questions, comments?
Attorney Okoye, can you just briefly share, in the event that someone goes into custody, how do people get in touch or realize? Because you did say where they would go for detention are private facilities as opposed to the facilities we all know about here in our communities. Can you give a sense or briefly of what families should do to figure out where their loved one has gone or who to get in contact to get them help? That's
a great question, Antonia. Thank you. So if someone is taken by ICE, there's usually, you go on the website, ICE, there's a 1-800 number. If you go on the ICE website, you're searching for someone. You should know which facility the person is located if you have the person's A number. All right. If you have the person's alien registration number, it should provide you access with whatever. But most importantly, I'm going to go back to family preparedness. Everybody in the community should have their family preparedness kit. The family preparedness kit has a lot of things, but most importantly, it has documents, birth certificates. There is an affidavit, a temporary agent affidavit that we've been doing for tons of clients in the last couple of weeks, where you're designating someone to become your agent in the event that ICE takes a hold of you. It's typically good for up to 2 years, but those things should be incorporated in every Know Your Rights presentation, family preparedness plan, so that you know that you're calling ABC in the event you're taking. But the client is allowed one phone call so they can talk to a loved ones. In these times that we don't even have the phone numbers of anyone in our head, it makes sense to remember one phone number to be able to access someone else if you're taken into custody.
What about, and I'm sure you have, does that kit contain forms for guardianship for, not only for kids? We had a lot of trouble the last time with like a dependent relative. Like I'm my mother's guardian and then she's left with no one.
That is a great question. So, guardianship is the permanent one that you essentially designating someone. It requires a petition at the probate court. But I'm not even advocating for guardianship. I'm advocating for the easier one, which is the temporary agent agreement. It has two people signing, witnessing it. It's notarized. You give it to your school. You give it to the person in the house. So important people have copies of that in the event of that. So it has to be someone who is 18 years old that you're designating as an agent. It has to be someone with no criminal record. It has to be so many other, you gotta be someone that that should be able to take care of your children.
Mel, did you have a question?
You're on mute, Melvin.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. Just a quick question. Is there two things? Is there a way that you could forward out the preparedness kit? And second of all, what you presented today was extraordinary. And I was wondering, is there a way to get that presentation? Because I have several organizations that I think would find this information very crucial in the discussion about the whole immigration conversation now. So is there a way you could forward that out to us?
Of
Both
course,
the
Melvin.
preparedness kits and your presentation, because it was, I can say again, it was very impressive and it addressed a lot of the concerns that was raised at a meeting I had with my Congresswoman Clark. And as a member of the Watertown Human Rights Commission, this was a conversation that came up last week at a MIRA event that we had in Watertown. So you touched on some key things, and I'm just hoping there's a way you can forward that to us so I can push this out and help in getting your message out to people who I know are very frightened right now and are looking for answers. And you've laid out some very crucial steps and action items that they should keep in mind.
And Antonia is ahead of us. She's going to send out the recording and the PowerPoint, as well as the contact information for you. You'll probably be changing your phone number because that's going to increase those calls you're getting.
But thank you.
You, Melvin, yes.
Catherine, did you have a question?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Well, Melvin asked one of them, but I want to know if there are any safe spaces for people, or is ICE now carte blanche? I'm thinking particularly about houses of worship and schools. And also, what are some ideas for houses of worship to work on this issue with? We've been supporting some immigrants, for example, from Afghanistan. What recommendations do you have for us? Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. I wish I have some good news, but did you see part of the executive orders that came out? I think it was yesterday, saying that houses of worship, hospitals, he literally, I watched the video, they're no longer protected spaces. And so here is what I do, but I'm kind of not normal. I'm kind of crazy in that way. I always just feel like, what's going to make a police officer or law enforcement agent or ICE officer coming to a house of worship? The human shield, the moral convictions of the people within that space is not going to let them. This is me just being crazy, but this is how crazy I believe in my conviction, is that I don't, and it will happen because they've been told that it's okay. But if we are doing this work, we're going to be ready for things like this. So I would still let the clients know hospitals, house of worship, schools are no longer safe spaces. However, we are here still working to help you.
And how would I get a Know Your Rights folks to maybe come to give a presentation?
Oh, there's a lot of Know Your Rights presentations going on right now. Antonia, you know a lot of them. You
Right.
attended one that I did a couple of weeks ago.
Catherine,
Yes,
if
we
you
can
send
share
us the
some-
stuff, we're doing a lot of that stuff, so we're happy to help with that.
We'll send out that information, Catherine, in
you.
the wrap up of the meeting notes.
That would be terrific. Thanks so much.
You know what? I have a question about, do you think, we were looking at this yesterday. So for instance, we have houses of worship in our community where people are already in sanctuary. They've been there for a while. Do you think, and we were thinking about whether there's room for argument, as with the challenge to birthright citizenship, or the attempt to eliminate it, you know, they're not trying to reach back. So the question is, the people who are already in those houses of worship, I think they've at least got a colorable argument that they're protected. Because right now, it does seem to be, it's almost a violation of their Fifth Amendment if we make them walk out. They're living in the church. Their choices now are either to walk out, basically ICE will be sitting out there and admit they've been in there, or just sit in there and wait. You know, we've had places calling us saying, what should we do with them? I think you have to make that argument that you can't reach backwards. They've been there for a couple of years in some cases.
That is a creative argument to make.
Oh, we're very creative. I'm not sure it's gonna fly, but I think that's their best choice, because otherwise now they gotta pack up 2 years worth of stuff, and it will take 5 minutes for somebody to see that and figure out that they're there.
That is a yes, yes,
Like,
that's a
why isn't
colorable.
that a violation? I mean, usually conduct isn't a violation of your fifth, but they're gonna say, where are you coming from? Well, I've been living here. Where you been? Well, I've been living
Exactly.
here.
Yeah, laws are not retroactive.
Right,
The
right.
order came out this day and they've been there for two. That is actually, yeah, yes. I mean, listen, the outer limits of every legal argument will be tested in the next. In fact, it's already, we all just have to get ready for that. But that is okay. And then all my clients are gonna be living there too, because they've lived there for the past 2 years.
Right.
You know?
Well, the other thing that, and to Catherine's point, the people who I don't think are protected, you know, in our community, many of the houses of worship have sponsored people to be here. So people, families living in an apartment, the worship community, I think there's nothing there. I don't think there's a lot of protection there. I think those people are
think so, too.
are gonna be targets.
I don't think so too, but what I know, and I don't think so too, but what I know is that they can't stop our work. This work
Right.
is still going to continue. And if ICE has to, I watched something from the mayor of Chicago last night where he essentially was saying to ICE, you're not messing with these people here. So it's
Right.
one of those communities that he is adamant, and that is what I know. ICE is not equipped to arrest 200 people that are shielded. I
Right.
mean, they can't
Yeah,
even.
they can't.
So that's what I know. So that's yeah. But your argument, I shall start spreading that argument, because
I think it's the only, we thought about it a lot yesterday. I think it's the only shot for those people, because they are literally trapped right now. You can't go out the front door, you can't go out the back door,
oh my God, okay, yes.
you know.
Yeah.
Stephen, did you have a question?
Yes, it's back to Antonia's question about, God forbid somebody's detained and they're taken somewhere. Is there a expectation of how people can find them? I can just imagine that ICE won't be sort of doing customer service. They're not going to care. And just how do we support people who are waiting and haven't heard? And if you just have any advice about that.
So on the ICE website, and that's a great question. On the ICE website, so now I'm only speaking as to what was, in fact, normal last week. We have a tracking link on ICE website, find my detainee or find my whatever, I don't know if it will still work or if it still does work. But there's an avenue for us to put the alien registration number. So that is part of, that's an important number. That's almost like a social security number for a lot of immigrants within the United States. So everyone kind of should know their alien registration number, so that if in the event the person, you can track them or trace them, the ICE, on the ICE website where you can track or trace someone in ICE custody, you can put their name. But I have to preface it in light of the expedited removal, which says that if you've been here for 2 years, the executive order around the expedited removal, which is if you've been here for 2 years or less, that they can actually take you. I don't know. So there's a lot of things just that I don't know anymore.
Anybody else? Thank you. This is incredibly helpful. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Now, changing topics a bit, but something else that, as I mentioned in talking about the fires, affects everybody, but certainly disproportionately impacts our more vulnerable communities, is climate change and the unequal effect we see of climate change on our communities. I think we're so focused sometimes on the environmental issue, we miss the social justice piece of that. The impact of rising temperatures, pollution, weather, are not distributed equally across the Commonwealth. And they fall hardest on those groups that have historically been marginalized and have really the fewest resources to adapt. And one example of that is this last session, our office filed a piece of legislation with Representative Livingstone, and Representative Conley from Cambridge is going to continue the fight on that bill this session, which addresses PFAS contamination in drinking water. So, okay, that affects everybody, right? Nobody should be drinking water. And you can go online and see the presentation we did last year, the program we did last year with Senator Markey. But if you are a person who has resources and can buy filters for your drinking water, your shower, your washing machine, you're obviously mitigating the impact. If you don't have those resources, your kids are drinking that water, you're washing your clothes in it, you are using that. So we filed a bill that would require the Department of Environmental Protection to maintain the list of communities where the PFAS levels exceed the maximum contaminant level. Unfortunately, we have a lot of those communities. I mean, Cambridge has a very, very high PFAS level. And then in those communities, the law would require that vouchers be provided for buying that water filtration equipment and really protecting public health. When you look at the research on the impact on babies, if you're mixing baby formula or whatever with that water, the impact on pregnant women that may be drinking that water, this is relatively short money for a great result. And it shouldn't depend on your zip code, whether or not you're going to get clean water. That's a human right. So we are hopeful that we'll be able to move that bill forward. We'll put the information about that bill in the chat. Obviously, we would appreciate your support. I would say, as I say all the time, the most remarkable thing that I have learned in this job about the legislature is that the magic number of constituent responses about a bill that triggers the office starting to work on it is 6. So a legislative office gets 6 inquiries about a bill, letters, phone calls, texts, whatever. That, there was hundreds and hundreds of bills. It's not anybody's fault. No one can be an expert on all of them. But what focuses their attention is 6 reaches from constituents. And today we're going to be talking about how things like urban heat islands, air pollution, flood risk, and limited access to green space create really the perfect storm for climate vulnerability for many of our communities of color. And to do that, I'm really happy to have with us Hassan Baruki, who is the executive director of the Boston Climate Action Network. And he is the first person of color to have been appointed to lead that organization in its more than 2 decades. So congratulations on that. That's a significant step. He studied economics at BU, worked for Senator Markey, the great environmental champion, worked with him on that, and has served on various federal, state, and local political campaigns. He was also appointed by Boston Mayor Michelle Wu to oversee the implementation of Boston's key climate law on the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance Review Board. Hassan is the co-coordinator of the Boston Green New Deal Coalition and serves as an environmental justice advisor to the Metropolitan Area Planning Council on the development of Greater Boston's Climate Action Plan. And he previously served as an advisor to the White House and the Department of Energy Opportunity Project. So, you know, really a different topic, but no less a social justice impact. So Hassan, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, DA Ryan. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you all for being here. And thank you as well, DA, for your leadership on the PFAS issue. This is, I mean, so critical to all of our residents. I want to start actually exactly where you started, which is in terms of the fact that I always say is that, look, environmental issues affect everyone, but not everyone's starting in the same place. And I want to focus that really with 2 neighborhoods, Back Bay and Roxbury in Boston, which I know is not in Middlesex County, but we have lots of residents in Middlesex County too. Back Bay and Roxbury are 2 miles apart. It's 2 stops on the Orange Line. And in that 2 stops on the Orange Line between Back Bay, a majority white community, and Roxbury, a majority Black community, your median income drops by $100,000 a year. 2 stops on the Orange Line means that your likelihood of having even a college degree is cut in half. 2 stops on the Orange Line means that your access to green space, your access to fresh, healthy foods, your access to prescription drugs through pharmacies is considerably lower. And we could go on and on. And so as a result, it's no surprise then that those 2 stops on the Orange Line mean that your life expectancy is almost a quarter century lower if you live in Roxbury than if you live in Back Bay, about 23 years. That 2 stops on the Orange Line, those 2 miles, aren't just the difference between Back Bay and Roxbury. We see this exact same story, these exact same disparities in cities and towns across our Commonwealth and across our country. And I say all this because so often we think about climate change as being this abstract issue of greenhouse gas emissions and global average temperature increase, and it's some future thing that affects polar bears and ice caps melting and some species of frog in the Amazon that you've never heard of. And like, we all care about frogs and polar bears, but you know, we care about more our families. And what every family cares about everywhere they are 2 things: their health and their wealth. And those are climate issues. And that's always the way that we've talked about it here at the Boston Climate Action Network, or BCAN. We're a community-based organization made up of residents from every neighborhood in our city, as well as some of our surrounding cities and towns like Cambridge and Somerville. And we've been around since 2000. And we've also got folks from all different places, all different generations, people in their 20s, people in their 80s, everyone in between. And we have folks who by and large are not showing up as policy experts, but who are regular residents who are anxious and alarmed at the inaction of our governments on climate for so long and who want to do something about it. So this is where we've always been asked this question. Why on earth should city government, should state government have anything to do with a big, quite literally global issue? And, you know, people say, oh, it's nice to raise awareness, but what's the actual point here? And so I bring it back to this. Climate change is caused by greenhouse gas emissions. And when we look at where all of those greenhouse gas emissions are coming from, it's really two big places. It's buildings, residential, commercial, industrial, and it's transportation. Probably not a big surprise there. So, and many of you know this from being municipal officials, most of our residents live in cities and towns. And when you look at where a lot of those folks are, it's not that many cities and towns at the end of the day. So if we can get these cities and towns, these states, to step up and lead, we can actually make a huge dent in our emissions, especially because we know things like buildings, what we build, where we build, and how we build, where our roads go and how those work, what our parks look like. Those are decisions made by cities and towns, not by Congress. When we think about highways and public transportation, we all know those are state government issues, not federal ones. So it actually turns out a lot of our municipal officials, our state officials, have more power to do things about climate issues than some of the folks in Washington. And so it's really critical that we step up. And that's exactly what we've been doing. Over the last 25 years, we've convened rallies and hosted educational workshops, not just talking about the broader issues, but talking about how this matters to people. When people's homes don't stay warm in the winter, when our energy bills are too high, those are climate issues. And not only have we taught people about the issues, we've gotten them connected hand in hand with city government. We pushed our city to host its first climate action planning process where residents across the city were engaged, which, you know, seems small now, but it was a big deal. Cities were not doing that that long ago. But this plan really became a blueprint for tangible policy change, like community choice electricity, a municipal electricity aggregation program that many of your cities and towns also have now, where the city buys electricity and they can buy it at the wholesale rate, like at Costco, and they can sell it back to residents at a lower price. So we save money on our energy bills, and the city can also make investments in renewable energy. So it's good to go green, and it's good for a different kind of green, which is our wallets. But recognizing 70% of emissions in the city come from buildings, we also passed a law that DA Ryan mentioned a little bit earlier, the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance, which requires all the largest buildings, which are the big polluters, to reduce emissions over time to reach net zero by 2050. That's the law I get to oversee, and it's really become a national model. New York City passed a similar law. They beat us by a few years, but in the time since we've passed this law, we've seen cities and towns as far away as Denver and Seattle, and as nearby as Cambridge and Newton, who've passed similar laws. And this is exactly what we need to see, right? Because if Boston gets everything right, but no one else does anything, we're not going to make a big difference. But if we can be a blueprint for what other places can do, and we can make it easier for everyone else to just copy us, this is my favorite kind of plagiarism, that is exactly what we need to make a big difference at a national level, at a global level. And we've also helped put forward an even more expansive vision for what climate really is. That's formed the basis of our mayor's platform and has allowed us to get even more done more quickly, like making sure that every new building that the city owns will be fossil fuel free. 2/3 of these buildings are school buildings, so it's especially important because our children's lungs are physically smaller. So breathing in the same amount of pollution for a child is way worse than breathing it in for you and I. And that's why it's important that we start with our kids. But on the buildings front, our work is not just limited to the city. It's also things that touch every one of your communities too, like the Mass Save program. Mass Save is an energy efficiency program. It's run by the utilities, and all of us pay in on our energy bills. There's a small little surcharge, and that all goes into a pool of money. It's about $5 billion. And all of us can get some of that money back to improve the insulation of our homes, switch out the heating systems, maybe get better appliances. All of those things are great for bringing down our energy use, for switching out our dirty gas furnaces with cleaner options. So it's a great program, and it works really well, especially if you own your home. But we know for so many of our residents, 60% in Boston, that's not the case. A lot of folks are renters. A lot of folks live in multifamily buildings. So it's not just about you yourself, but you've got to coordinate with everyone else in the building. And then imagine you don't speak English fluently. The path to accessing a program like this is even rockier and even steeper. And so we have taken this issue head on for many years, have gotten residents in every one of our neighborhoods connected with this program. This is a workshop we had standing room only about a year and a half ago in East Boston. We did this simultaneously in English and Spanish for community members of all different backgrounds. And it's made a difference. People have gotten aware of the program, they've gotten more connected, but we've got a heck of a lot more work to do. And through this process, we've also worked hand in hand with our utilities, with our community members, with community groups to improve the Mass Save program. And I'm really excited that next month we anticipate, knock on wood, that the Department of Public Utilities at the state level will approve the best, most comprehensive, most equitable Mass Save program plan yet. That will make sure that even more of our residents can access the program, tears down some of those barriers, and make sure this is fully aligned with our climate goals. And make no mistake, this is because of so many of the residents and organizations that have gotten in this fight, that have gotten engaged with the utilities, and have made their voices heard. So, for all the progress we've made, we obviously find ourselves in a moment where the urgency of this crisis has never been greater. And just this week, we've seen a lot of developments that move us in the wrong direction. Most of you have probably seen the news that once again, the United States has withdrawn from the Paris Climate Agreement. This is unproductive, obviously. It makes it harder for us to go to other countries and ask them to step up on climate if we ourselves aren't doing the same thing. And it's especially the case for countries that don't have all the money to make big climate investments. Countries that want to grow and develop their economies, but who right now are relying on fossil fuels. That's not a good pathway, especially not for the future. It's the responsibility of countries like the United States to step up and bridge that funding gap. But when we abdicate our leadership role at the global level, that can't happen. And so it not only makes it hard for us to do the right thing, it makes it harder for everyone else to do the right thing too. But I want to focus on two other things that maybe don't get as much coverage, but are especially important, particularly for the Commonwealth. The first is ending all wind energy permits on federally overseen waters. This is especially important because Massachusetts and our coast here in New England is one of the best places for offshore wind in the world. And we've seen this burgeoning offshore wind industry, despite many challenges, has finally started taking shape. Actions like this set us back and jeopardize the not only important clean energy progress that we've made, but also the incredible economic progress we have. So many companies are invested in this. So many workers have gotten great jobs as a result of this industry. We need this to continue. And so executive orders like that are harmful, as are things like declaring an energy emergency, which has really been, make no mistake, a way for the president to have expanded emergency powers to do things like make it easier to drill for oil and gas on federal lands, or to make it easier to approve permits for fossil fuel power plants to meet the demands that will only accelerate in terms of energy use. And so at the same time that we see all of this, we also know, no secret here, that we see a lot of challenges here at home that didn't change after the election. We know the cost of rent and mortgages continue to go up and up, and so many of our residents are just struggling to get by and pay their rent. It's also true on utility bills. We have some of the highest energy bills in the country, in part because most of our electricity comes from fossil fuels, which we have to import. So the import cost gets passed on to all of us. And as a coastal state, sea level rise that becomes worse with climate change is an immediate and present danger to our residents. We've seen flooding happen, even sunny day flooding like this in the Wharf District in Boston last fall. And we know, of course, a storm surge brought on by a hurricane, like what we've seen in the Gulf Coast in the last fall, would exacerbate this tremendously. And that puts residents' lives at risk, and it puts their families at risk, and it puts their savings at risk if it takes their home out. So it's not just sea level rise, by the way. Climate change also brings things like more intense and more frequent extreme heat. And like with all issues, that doesn't affect all of our neighborhoods equally. Neighborhoods without as much tree canopy are more vulnerable to extreme heat, and that ultimately means the residents there are vulnerable to things like heat stroke. Same is true with rainfall. We've seen more and more rainfall, and that brings inland flooding, especially when we have an aging stormwater system here in Massachusetts. So, what do we do? How can all of us in the roles that we have in various cities and towns actually do something to take action on climate? The first, as I always say, is that we have always got to bring climate change back to the things that people feel. It's not just about greenhouse gas emissions. It's about solving so many of the day-to-day challenges that hold our residents back. Homes and energy bills that aren't affordable, transportation and transit that isn't reliable, traffic that's congested. No one here likes that. But also jobs that so often don't pay our residents what they need to get by. All of these challenges and more can be solved by climate action. So not only are we taking care of a long-term crisis, we can make our lives better in the short term today. So how we talk about things matters. And second, we have to get everyone in on this fight. We know when it comes to climate, this is not just a task for the Environmental Protection Agency or the Department of Energy. We know every part of our government has a role to play in the climate action process, as does every part of our society. And for all the doom and gloom, I've been never more hopeful than today, because we see so many leaders stepping up, whether it be in government at all levels or in nonprofits or faith-based communities or in the private sector, to step up and lead on climate and do what they can through their own communities and through the institutions that they're a part of. And we need to get all of our residents in on this fight too. That's how we've shifted politics and policy here in Boston. That's how we've gotten all of these things done. But in all the residents that we engage, we don't just change policies. We change hearts and minds, because we get people to stop feeling anxious and overwhelmed about this crisis and start feeling hopeful and optimistic. And that is so powerful. And so, for those of you who are in government, those of you who work with government, for those of you who engage with government, which I assume is everyone here, what can you do? What tangibly does this look like? We convene a coalition, the Boston Green New Deal Coalition, and we set out to answer this exact question on every part of city government. We brought together residents and organizations, not only climate and energy ones, but work being done on housing and transportation and food and health and open space. And we put together this vision that we're making happen in Boston, but that really can work anywhere. On the energy front, it's improving the energy efficiency of our buildings. I mentioned that municipal electricity aggregation program. Dozens and dozens of cities and towns are doing that in Massachusetts, and more are on the way. That's what we need to do. And we know every one of us can be a powerful educator to raise awareness about all of this with our own networks. It's also about our homes, making big investments in improving energy efficiency, decarbonizing, getting people access to mass save. That's an issue everyone feels, and cities can do something. But of course, it's no secret, cities and towns have a powerful role to play when it comes to green space. We typically think about that with parks, but it's also true on things like green stormwater infrastructure, because having a permeable surface on the ground to absorb the rainfall is way more effective than having concrete surfaces that bring more flooding. And my favorite topic, public transit is critical here. So we've got to do everything we can, not just to improve and expand our public transportation, but also to make sure that we're doing the supporting infrastructure so that people can use it. Is it safe to get on the bus? Are the buses running quickly and efficiently? Those are the things that determine whether or not folks are willing to take that bus or whether they drive. And especially when it comes to city and town governments, school buses are such a great place to start when it comes to electrification. And of course, this creates jobs and it creates infrastructure. But we also know getting people to walk and bike more, and especially making sure it's safe to do all of that, that's also part of this. And finally, this is the uniting theme of all of these things. We know that every single one of these things is an opportunity for us to create great paying jobs that go to our residents. That's something everyone can get behind. And we can start that training much earlier than we conventionally have thought about it. Our young people are all thinking about climate change, I assure you of that. But they can all be a part of the solution to this. And we can start with our public schools, not just educating students about the science and the bad things that might happen, but also the tangible skills and experiences that they need to be a part of the green economy. And we've got an opportunity to bring up so many of our small businesses, particularly our minority and women-owned business enterprises who sometimes have even rockier and even steeper paths to being successful. When we empower those businesses, not only do we get great climate action work done, but we, in some small way, can help close the racial wealth gap and the gender wealth gap too. And so all of these things are big policy ideas, and they all start with first steps, right? Some things you can do right now: schedule a Mass Save home energy assessment, get some of that work done. And a lot of it will be free or at pretty low cost. And if you're in a city that has an electricity program, opt in. And these things can help make a big difference. Now, there's a whole lot more to do, but it's really when we bring in all of our residents, people from every part of our communities in on this fight, that we can make this happen. And look, it's a bleak time to think about this, but I think it really emphasizes that it is all the more important today for cities, towns, and states to step up and lead when our federal government isn't. And the work that we do in these next several years will define the next several generations of life in our Commonwealth and life in our country. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. That was helpful. You know, can I just ask you a question? Somebody pointed out in the chat that the Mass Save programs aren't available in a community where they have their own electricity. But is that they're not available for free, or are they not available at all? If you pay something, can you still get those services?
Great question. And yeah, unfortunately, they are not available at all for municipal light plant communities.
Questions, comments? Thank you. Questions, comments?
Just a quick question. How do we have these community conversations just to even start getting residents to be aware of that? I just want to give examples to those on the call that might want to do that, whether it's a community conversation, getting together the youth that you said that kind of spear this conversation on climate change, because all of our communities in Middlesex are different geographically, and also the diversity within them. So can you just talk a little bit about how your organization can help do that?
Absolutely. One of the places that we first started and that we continue to use as an entry point is home energy efficiency. So many of us feel the challenges of homes that don't stay warm in the winter or that don't stay cool in the summer. A lot of it is, we have a lot of old buildings here in the Commonwealth. And so having community meetings about the tangible things people can do to solve those problems in their own home, those have brought out a lot of people and a lot of different types of folks who may not otherwise be thinking of themselves as, climate advocates. In the process, of course, they learn a lot about how these programs are one piece of the larger climate action strategy. But they also can leave with tangible resources that they can take back and help improve their homes. So that's, I think, a broad strategy. And then I think on the youth front, you know, the youth are all thinking about this issue, especially, you know, they're going to be around to experience this longer than anyone. And we've always found that the youth are powerful in organizing themselves and needing the support to do that, but also in reaching their own families, their parents, their guardians, and getting them to do some of these exact same things. So it's really through our schools and through our faith-based youth programs that we've seen a lot of success in engaging young people.
Anybody else? Questions, comments? Hassan, thank you for being with us. That was really helpful. Thank you. We'll share your presentation as well.
Yep.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
This is Mel. Just a quick question. I just wanted to circle back on something that was mentioned. I know I've had some conversations with my senator, Senator Brownsberger, about this issue. Is there I guess, a mapped out action plan that can kind of help guide communities? And second of all, a question came up last night about carbon pricing in relationship to both clean energy and energy efficiency. And I think it's kind of because of what's happening in New York. But the question is, do you see something like that? I know that Mayor Wu had made mention about that last year as a possibility. And after what happened in New York, do we see ourselves even moving in that direction to try to address the question of trying to initiate more clean energy actions? So do you see something like that happening again, or happening here in Massachusetts? Let's say that.
Yeah, great questions. So on the first point, yeah, there are some really great roadmaps for things that cities and towns can do. And the Commonwealth actually right now has funded programs to support towns in doing that. The Municipal Vulnerability Program, or MVP program, gives money to communities to help improve their resilience against climate change. And then they also have, I want to call it I think it's the Green Communities Program, where, you know, they have really good roadmaps for exactly what cities and towns can do. And on the second question on congestion pricing, yeah, we're all looking very with a lot of interest in what's going on in New York City. And I think one of the things that has made it a lot more successful in New York City is that there is, and it's one of the few places in the country where there is really robust public transit around the clock. And so people have better options than to just drive, especially in that in lower Manhattan and Midtown, where the congestion pricing is taking effect. As far as whether or not that would work here in Massachusetts, I mean, that's a really great question. I think a lot of people are thinking about that. I think that, you know, it really depends on how we target this and if we can give people better options to doing so. I would not want to put a tax on people who don't have any other option but to drive. But I think especially in a lot of the parts in downtown Boston where we do have more of that transit and more of those alternatives, then it really could be more effective. And especially if we make bigger investments in public transit and improving it in advance of launching the congestion pricing program. That's what they did in Europe. In some of the European countries, when they had a similar program, they launched many more bus routes before they had the program. So residents knew there were alternatives to driving and had more of those in their neighborhoods that served their needs before they had to go and pay that additional price. But ultimately, look, there's a lot of work to do on public transit. That money needs to come from somewhere. And so every tool that we can use in our toolbox to address the issue of traffic and to improve public transit, I think we should consider.
Thank you. Thank you. There's one last comment in the chat about the aging sewer system. And then what do you do about receipts, or how do you come up with the money for those long-term remedies?
Yes, great question. So in terms of a lot of that, I mentioned the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program. A lot of that funding can be used to improve the resilience of a lot of those things. So that's something that every city and town should be looking into and taking advantage of if you're not already. The broader issue, though, and you mentioned in the question, you know, for combined sewer overflows, yeah, that's a whole, we could actually have a whole separate webinar. But it is a really critical challenge from a climate standpoint and from a public health and safety standpoint if we're having all kinds of contaminants that go into our groundwater, that go into our rivers, and then ultimately find their way in our ocean. So there are really critical infrastructure improvements that need to be done, and a lot of it really is just replacement of some of this old pipes, the old CSOs, the combined sewer overflows. You know, that's a place where, while existing funding is good and helpful, we still need to see additional funding come from the state and from the federal government to address this, because, and many of you know this better than I do, you know, so many of our cities and towns are just strapped when it comes to additional cash for capital projects. So we need all the help we can get. And I hope that we can get this in some of the additional bond bills that the legislature is going to consider in this coming session.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to both of our speakers. I know we ran a few minutes over, which we try not to do, but I think it was well worth it this morning. So thank you for joining us. Our next meeting is Thursday, February 20th at 10 o'clock. We look forward to seeing you. We will send around the presentations from today as well as the contact information. So thank you all. Be safe, stay warm.